What if the quiet old man everyone ignored in town had been hiding a secret so terrifying, so unbelievable, that he carried it with him for more than 40 years, straight to his grave? And what if the truth didn't come out until after he died? Because that's exactly what happened in a small town called Brook Hollow. For decades, people there lived normal lives. Children rode bicycles through the streets. Neighbors waved to each other from their porches. Nothing ever seemed unusual, except for one man. Everyone in Brook Hollow knew him. Old Mr. Harold Bennett. The strange man who lived at the edge of town. You see, Harold Bennett wasn't like the other residents. He kept to himself. He rarely spoke to anyone. And he had this unsettling habit of watching people silently from his front porch. Some people said he was just lonely. Others said he was hiding something. But no one ever imagined how dark the truth really was. Harold had lived in that same creaky wooden house for nearly 40 years. The paint had long faded, the fence leaned crookedly, and weeds had swallowed most of the yard. Yet somehow, he never moved. Every morning at exactly 7 o'clock, he would step outside, sit in the same old chair, and stare down the road. To stare. For hours. Kids walking to school would whisper to each other. "Why does he always look like that?" "I don't know," another child would say nervously. "My mom says don't go near him." Even the adults found him unsettling. One afternoon, 2 neighbors stood by the sidewalk watching him from across the street. "Does he even have family?" one woman asked quietly. Her friend shrugged. "I've lived here 20 years, and I've never seen anyone visit him. No wife. No children. None." It was as if Harold Bennett had simply appeared in Brook Hollow one day and decided to stay forever. But there was something else people rarely talked about. Something that had happened long ago. A mystery that the town never truly solved. 42 years earlier, a young woman named Emily Carter disappeared. Emily was only 23 years old. Bright. Friendly. Everyone in town knew her. She worked at a small cafe near Main Street, and customers loved her cheerful smile. But one rainy evening, she vanished. Completely. No one saw her leave town. No one saw her get into a car. It was like she had simply disappeared into thin air. The police searched everywhere. The woods, the nearby river, every road leading out of town. But they found nothing. Weeks passed, then months. Eventually, people began to assume the same thing. She must have run away. That's what most residents believed. But Emily's family never accepted that explanation. "I know my daughter," her mother told investigators again and again. "She wouldn't just leave like that." Still, without evidence, the case slowly faded into the background. Life in Brook Hollow returned to normal. Years passed, then decades, and the mystery of Emily Carter became nothing more than an old story people occasionally mentioned. But here's the strange part. The same year Emily disappeared, a man named Harold Bennett moved into town. He bought the old house at the edge of Brook Hollow, and he never left. At the time, no one thought much about it. After all, people moved to new towns all the time. But looking back later, some residents began to feel a chill run down their spine, because the timing suddenly felt too perfect. Yet Harold lived quietly for decades, never causing trouble, never breaking the law, just sitting on that porch, watching the road, watching people, watching everything, until one cold October morning, when something unexpected happened. The town doctor received a call from Harold's house. When he arrived, Harold Bennett was lying motionless in his chair. The old man had died peacefully in his sleep. At least, that's what everyone thought. The news spread quickly. "Did you hear?" a shop owner said that afternoon. "Old Harold passed away." "Well," another man replied with a sigh, "I suppose it was his time." A small funeral was held 3 days later. Only a handful of people attended. Few neighbors, the town pastor, and the funeral director. That was it. No family. No relatives. No friends. It was a quiet farewell for a man who had lived such a quiet life. But what happened next changed everything. 1 week after Harold's burial, a black car rolled slowly into Brook Hollow. It stopped in front of the town hall. A tall man in a dark suit stepped out, holding a leather briefcase. He walked inside and asked to speak with the sheriff. When Sheriff Daniels arrived, the man introduced himself calmly. "My name is Richard Lawson," he said. "I'm an attorney." The sheriff nodded. "And what brings you here?" The lawyer opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick envelope sealed with red wax. "This," he said quietly, "was left by a man named Harold Bennett." The sheriff frowned. "Harold Bennett?" "Yes." The lawyer placed the envelope on the desk. "He gave me very specific instructions," the attorney continued slowly. "This letter was not to be opened until after his death." The sheriff stared at the envelope. Something about it felt unsettling. "And what's inside?" he asked. The lawyer took a slow breath. "I don't know. But Harold Bennett told me something before he died." The sheriff leaned forward. "What did he say?" The lawyer's voice dropped to a whisper. "He said when this letter is opened, Brook Hollow will finally learn the truth about what happened 42 years ago." The room fell silent. Sheriff Daniels felt a cold chill crawl up his spine. Because 42 years ago was the year Emily Carter disappeared. And whatever Harold Bennett had written in that envelope was a secret he had carried with him all the way to the grave. But what the sheriff would discover inside that letter was far more disturbing than anyone in Brook Hollow could have ever imagined. The sheriff finally opens Harold Bennett's letter. And what he reads inside shocked the entire town. The sheriff stared at the envelope on his desk. For several seconds no one spoke. The red wax seal looked old, fragile, almost like it had been waiting years for this moment. Sheriff Daniels slowly looked up at the attorney. "You're telling me," he said carefully, "that this letter has something to do with Emily Carter?" The lawyer nodded once. "That is exactly what Harold Bennett implied." The sheriff leaned back in his chair, rubbing his jaw. "Emily Carter disappeared 42 years ago," he murmured. "And the man who wrote that letter moved here that same year." The room suddenly felt colder. Sheriff Daniels picked up the envelope. Felt heavy. Too heavy for just a simple letter. His fingers hesitated over the wax seal. "You might want witnesses," the attorney said quietly. The sheriff nodded. Within minutes, the deputy and the town clerk were called into the office. Everyone stood around the desk. All eyes locked on the envelope. Sheriff Daniels finally spoke. "All right. Let's see what the old man took to the grave." He broke the seal. Crack. The sound echoed through the room. Slowly, carefully, he pulled out several folded pages. The paper looked yellow with age. The handwriting was shaky but clear. The sheriff began reading aloud. "My name is Harold Bennett. If you are reading this letter, then I am already gone. And if I am gone, then the truth can finally come out." Everyone in the room leaned closer. Sheriff Daniels continued reading. "For 42 years I have lived with a secret that destroyed my peace, my sleep and my soul. I have carried it every day and every night." The sheriff paused. Deputy Carter whispered, "What kind of secret is this?" Sheriff Daniels kept reading. "The night Emily Carter disappeared, I was there." The room froze. "What?" the town clerk gasped. Sheriff Daniels looked up slowly. "You hear that?" he said quietly. "He said he was there." The sheriff continued reading. "That night there was heavy rain. The roads were nearly empty. I was driving through Brook Hollow, trying to reach the highway before the storm got worse." Sheriff Daniels' voice lowered. "And then something happened that I will regret for the rest of my life." The deputy swallowed nervously. "What happened?" The sheriff kept reading. "I turned onto Mill Road. The rain was pouring so hard I could barely see the road ahead. My headlights caught a figure walking near the shoulder." Sheriff Daniels paused again. That figure was Emily Carter. Silence filled the room. She stepped closer to the road, the letter continued. And before I could react, the sheriff stopped reading. His voice tightened. Before I could react, my car struck her. The town clerk covered her mouth. Oh my God! The deputy shook his head. Are you saying he hit her? Sheriff Daniels nodded slowly. That's what the letter says. The sheriff read the next line. She fell instantly. I slammed the brakes and ran out into the rain. Emily was lying on the ground, barely moving. The sheriff's voice grew heavier. I remember kneeling beside her, calling her name, begging her to wake up. Deputy Carter whispered, "Was she?" Sheriff Daniels continued, "She died within minutes." The room went completely silent. The sheriff turned the page. "I should have called the police immediately," the letter said. "But fear took control of me. I panicked. I knew the town would think I did it intentionally. I thought my life would be over." The deputy slammed his hand lightly on the desk. "So he covered it up." Sheriff Daniels nodded grimly. The sheriff read on. The storm was raging. No one was around. No cars. No witnesses. I made the worst decision of my life that night. I carried her into my car. I drove to the woods behind what is now my property. The town clerk looked pale. "That house," she whispered. "The one he lived in all these years." Sheriff Daniels nodded. The sheriff read the next part slowly. "I buried the truth that night. I buried it deep enough that no one would ever find it." Deputy Carter leaned forward. "Wait, what does that mean?" Sheriff Daniels continued reading. "For 42 years I watched this town live peacefully, while I carried the weight of what I had done. Every morning I sat on my porch, looking down the road, remembering the night everything changed. That road haunted me. Every passing car reminded me of the mistake I could never undo." The sheriff turned the final page. But his eyes suddenly widened. "What?" the deputy asked quickly. "What does it say?" Sheriff Daniels looked up slowly. "He left directions." "Directions to what?" Sheriff Daniels held up the page. "To where he buried Emily Carter." The town clerk gasped loudly. "You mean she's still there?" Sheriff Daniels nodded. "According to this letter, yes." Deputy Carter ran a hand through his hair. "So the whole town thought she ran away. And all this time, she was buried right behind his house?" Sheriff Daniels folded the letter slowly. "Well," he said quietly, "there's only one way to find out." That same afternoon, police vehicles drove down the narrow road leading to Harold Bennett's property. Rain clouds were gathering again, almost like the night 42 years earlier. Sheriff Daniels stood beside the old wooden house. The porch chair was still there. Now. The sheriff looked toward the woods behind the property. According to the letter, that was where the truth had been buried. Deputy Carter approached him. "You think the old man was telling the truth?" Sheriff Daniels stared at the tree line. "We're about to find out." Moments later, investigators walked into the woods with shovels. The town watched from a distance, everyone whispering, everyone wondering, everyone afraid of what they might discover. But what the sheriff and his team were about to uncover in those woods would reveal something even darker than Harold Bennett's confession. And the most shocking truth had not even been written in the letter yet. The investigators uncover something buried in the woods, and the secret Harold Bennett carried to his grave becomes even more disturbing than anyone imagined. The woods behind Harold Bennett's house were quiet. Too quiet. Sheriff Daniels stepped carefully over fallen branches as the investigators moved deeper between the tall trees. The air felt heavy, and dark clouds had gathered overhead, casting long shadows across the ground. Deputy Carter checked the paper again. "This is the spot he marked," he said, pointing to a rough sketch Harold had drawn in the letter. A large oak tree stood nearby, its thick roots twisting across the ground like old fingers. Sheriff Daniels exhaled slowly. "Well," he said, "let's see if the old man was telling the truth." Two investigators pushed their shovels into the dirt. The sound echoed through the quiet woods. Everyone watched. The sheriff folded his arms, his eyes locked on the ground. The digging continued. Shovel after shovel of dirt was tossed aside. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. Sweat ran down one investigator's face as he paused. "You think it's really here?" he asked. Sheriff Daniels didn't answer. But just as the man lifted his shovel again, the metal struck something hard beneath the soil. Everyone froze. "Wait," the deputy said. They dropped to their knees and began clearing the dirt carefully with their hands. Slowly, something began to appear. Piece of old fabric. Sheriff Daniels felt his stomach tighten. "Oh no!" the town clerk whispered from behind them. More dirt was brushed away. And then it became unmistakable. Human remains. The sheriff stood up slowly, his face pale. "Call it in," he said quietly. Deputy Carter grabbed his radio immediately. "We found something," he reported. The news spread through Brook Hollow like wildfire. By evening, the entire town was talking about it. "Did you hear?" one shopkeeper whispered to a customer. "They found her." Another woman shook her head in disbelief. 42 years. She was there the whole time. Police confirmed what everyone feared. The remains belonged to Emily Carter. Harold Bennett had told the truth. But that wasn't the end of the mystery. Not even close. Because when investigators returned to Harold's house later that night, something unexpected happened. Deputy Carter stepped into the old living room, shining his flashlight across dusty furniture. "Hard to believe he lived here all these years," he muttered. Sheriff Daniels walked toward a small desk in the corner. On top of it sat an old wooden box. "That wasn't mentioned in the letter," the deputy said. Sheriff Daniels examined it carefully. The lock was rusty but weak. Moments later, crack. The box opened. Inside were dozens of old photographs, letters, and a small notebook. The sheriff flipped open the first photo. His eyes widened. "Deputy, you need to see this." The deputy stepped closer. "What is it?" Sheriff Daniels held up the photograph. It showed a young Harold Bennett, standing beside a smiling young woman. The deputy leaned closer. "Wait a second. That's Emily Carter." The room fell silent. Sheriff Daniels picked up another photo. And another. Every single one showed Harold and Emily together, laughing, standing close, holding hands. The deputy stared in shock. They knew each other. Sheriff Daniels nodded slowly. They didn't just know each other. He opened the notebook. "These look like journal entries." The sheriff began reading quietly. "I met Emily today. She makes the world feel brighter." Another entry. "Emily says we should leave Brook Hollow someday and start a new life." The deputy's eyes widened. They were together. Sheriff Daniels turned another page. The final entry stopped him cold. He read it out loud. "Emily told me she was pregnant tonight." Deputy Carter's mouth dropped open. "What?" The sheriff continued. "She said we had to tell the town. She believed people would understand." The deputy whispered slowly. "But Harold was afraid." Sheriff Daniels nodded. "And that's when everything changed." The sheriff looked at the final page. The handwriting was shaky, like it had been written many years later. "I did not only bury Emily that night. I buried my entire life." Sheriff Daniels closed the notebook slowly. "So the truth is," the deputy said quietly, "they were planning a future together." The sheriff nodded. "And one moment of panic destroyed everything." The town never knew. For 42 years, Harold Bennett sat on that porch every morning, watching the same road where Emily had taken her final steps, remembering the life they were supposed to have, remembering the child that never had the chance to be born. and carrying the weight of that secret every single day. Until he died. The mystery of Emily Carter was finally solved. But the story left the town with a haunting question. How different would everything have been if Harold had simply told the truth that night? Sometimes the secrets people carry are heavier than anyone can imagine. And sometimes, those secrets stay buried for decades, until the truth finally finds its way back to the surface. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to this channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next mystery. And I want to hear from you. Do you think Harold Bennett deserved forgiveness or justice? Drop your thoughts in the comments below.